The voices of New Brunswick writers are the heart of WordCraft, a podcast aimed at creating community through words. WordCraft is a creation of the Writers' Federation of New Brunswick, a nonprofit organization that helps New Brunswick writers to write, acquire skills, and showcase their talents to the world. The show is hosted and produced by Jenna Morton, with technical production by Tosh Taylor. The WFNB acknowledges that the land on which we live, work, and gather is the traditional unceded territory of the Wolastoqiyik and Mi'kmaq Peoples. We honor the spirit of our ancestors' treaties of peace and friendship. We acknowledge the support of the Canadian Council for the Arts.
Welcome to another episode of WordCraft, a podcast by the Writers' Federation of New Brunswick. I'm your host, Jenna Morton. On this show, we speak with New Brunswick writers in various genres and stages of their work. We highlight programs presented by the Writers' Federation, and we explore topics relating more to the industry side of writing. Topics that we hope resonate whether you consider yourself a hobbyist, an emerging writer, or a published professional. On this episode, we're diving into the world of DIY and indie publishing with someone who is enthusiastically embracing this space and sharing very open and honest insights about his journey. Joe Mahoney is the man behind Donovan Street Press, which is based here in Riverview, New Brunswick. He's the author of several titles, including his memoir, Adventures in the Radio Trade, and a science fiction novel, A Time and a Place. He's experienced working with a publishing house and now with running his own. Welcome to the podcast, Joe.
Thanks for having me.
Well, thank you so much for accepting the invitation and for sharing so much of your journey in this world online for everyone to dive into. I've been very much enjoying my time in your Substack, reading, picking around in your brain with what you've shared there. And we're going to dive into a little bit of that. But before we do, I would love if you could just kind of give us a little bit of the background, set us up. What is Donovan Street Press?
So Donovan Street Press started when my original publisher, Five Rivers Publishing, they folded after a successful run, as small indie presses sometimes do. And I got the rights back to my book, A Time and a Place, which you mentioned. But I didn't want it to be unavailable. So I realized that to get it out there, I was going to have to self-publish it. And I kind of, grew up in the world of you didn't self-publish. You wanted to have a legitimate traditional publisher. But those days are long in the past. I think it has gone from, being something with a sort of a whiff of, oh, I see, he couldn't make it with a traditional press, to being something even more than respectable, kind of cool, actually. So I did self-publish it. And then, based on that experience, published a collection of short stories. And then my father had written a whole bunch of short stories that I had long wanted to do something with. I now knew how to do it. So I did it under the imprint of Donovan Street Press. And then I pretty much had my own little press at that point. And when I went to publish a memoir, which was also mentioned, Adventures in the Radio Trade, no publishing house out there is going to publish a memoir from basically an unknown quantity like me. So it was obviously I was going to have to do that one myself as well. Because it was a memoir and I was talking about the CBC, I thought it made sense to protect myself. I thought one way to protect myself was to incorporate the company and publish it under Donovan Street Press. And then once I had an incorporated company, it's like you can see how it's all like, kind of lining up. It's like, oh, well, gee, I got all these, really talented writer friends that might appreciate having their books published under a banner. And I was right about that. And then I started meeting yet other people, and it became a thing.
Talk a little bit more about those little steps and the learning curves. You share a lot on your Substack about, some of the lessons that you've learned over the years in putting out your own work, and then others.
Well, there's the basic process of doing it, and which is one of the reasons that I did it, because I'm super interested in writing and super interested in publishing. So I wanted to understand the process from beginning to end, which I guess is kind of my nature. I just wanted to understand it as deeply as I could. So putting a book together from front to end, you obviously have to write the book, which many of us can do, and then you have to have it properly edited. But then then you're getting into more of the black box stuff that people don't necessarily understand how to do, which is, okay, how do you then format the manuscript so that you can actually publish it on the various platforms out there, Barnes and Noble, Amazon, Chapters, etc. How do you turn it into a real physical book? So there's all that stuff, which I've learned a number of different ways to do it. You can either do it yourself with your own software, or you can hire a professional to do it. And there's stuff that I still don't really understand the alchemy, such as I don't trust myself to make a proper cover for a book. So I will always hire someone to do a proper cover to avoid what a friend of mine in the industry refers to as indie death covers. Covers designed not to sell books,
Yes.
covers designed to repulse readers from purchasing that book.
I
So we
think
don't
we can
want those.
all visualize those right now. We've seen them.
Yeah, with all due respect to the writers and artists involved in those, but which all of which is to say that the cover is very important. Presenting. I've sort of developed this thesis that if you're doing indie publishing, you're competing with everyone else out there. You're competing with the major publishers. Ideally, you want to create a book that is indistinguishable from a major publisher. And, those in the inside might know. They might, go to the back page and go, oh, this was printed in Bolton, Ontario. I see. So that was print on demand, you know? But the average reader is not going to know or care about that. So you make the writing as good as anything else out there, the formatting as good as everything else out there, the cover is good, and then you're halfway to the races. But so I figured all of that out, and I got to the point where I could, produce a professional book, um, and meet those marks. But then even beyond that, then then you're getting into the black box of, well, how do you market and sell this thing? And that's the part that I've figured out a few little things, but I'm still working at. So,
I think it would be fair to say that even people in marketing feel like they're still figuring that out. They may be a few steps ahead of the indies, but like anything, it's a constantly changing and evolving atmosphere that you're working in. And just the difference in the quality of self-published works over the past 5 to 10 years is incredible. And the same thing, I think we will see some of that happening with people getting a better handle on how to market their own books or indie books. Talk a little bit about what what you're hearing from other people who are coming to you with their books or with their ideas and their questions about that space and that kind of shift that we're seeing in terms of how people approach the legitimacy of indie publishing versus the traditional publishers.
well, I think the line between indie publishing and traditional publishers, you know, and I use the word traditional there to mean the established big publishers, like Random House or Harper Collins or Penguin. I think the line is a little bit blurred for writers and readers because so Donovan Street Press has been incorporated now for what, 2 or 3 years, and but people immediately recognized it or accepted it as being an acceptable, legitimate publisher. And so, so my job is partially to keep that veil of respectability and increase it if I can, by treating authors well, by putting out quality books, Because it's very easy to slip, and there's the horror stories out there of indie publishers who haven't treated their authors well or have been up to other shenanigans or whatever. So, so I know what the bar is there. So readers and writers, it's almost like they care a little bit. I mean, they know enough to. It's like, okay, if I want to sell, 10,000 or 100,000 copies of my book, I'm probably going to have more luck going with one of the big five. But many of them don't really care about that because they know that even that is a lottery. So they just want to get their book published by a respectable, legitimate publisher. So because then, I mean, there's a certain cachet with that. It's like, oh, okay, so and so is publishing my book. They can look at the other books and other authors that are being published by that indie press and go, oh, I'm in good company here, and they can feel good about themselves. Uh, and then you're into, okay, well, let's get into the business of actually, uh, you know, selling copies of this book and making money for both the author and the publisher. And I'll just add at this point that I'm very big on the authors actually making money. I'm not, looking to make money off the backs of the authors, and I am actively trying to, not always successfully, trying to prevent the authors from engaging in activities that will, you know, ensure that they spend more than they make with the publishing of their book. I think it's a big challenge.
Yes, I think it would be very easy to overspend in some of those marketing areas that people don't always think of as real associated costs. The tables at markets, and you shared a little bit about your delving into social media ads, and there's a lot of places you can very easily say goodbye to the money that you may have earned from the printing of the book.
Yeah, and I'm the worst. I'm the worst possible example. I've tried everything, so that I can. It's almost like a parent with their kids. It's like, I've made all these mistakes, Uh, now you should not have to make those mistakes because I've made them for you. But then the kids will go and make the mistakes anyway. The authors will go and make the mistakes anyway, you know. But all we can do is we can offer a counsel, and say, that those Amazon ads that you think are going to sell your books, they're probably just going to cost you money.
Like most things, it's word of mouth that always works the best, right? If you can find one person who reads your book and loves it and tells another, that's going to be what sets you apart, I think.
Well, the I think the classic joke is, how do you turn a book into a bestseller? First, write a bestseller, you know? So, because and then the word of mouth will work. But usually, uh, we're after that word of mouth. I think it rarely happens, or it rarely happens to the degree that we want it to happen. And when I stumble across a fellow writer or a book that I do really like, especially one, that is not known by anybody, um, I will champion that book. I'll try to be that word of mouth. And I think more of us in the indie publishing community need to do that, And like, for example, with the Partridge Island Press folks, who have always impressed me, and they now have their bookstore, the Right Cup Bookstore Cafe in St. John, and they're doing so much to champion indie publishing, and that's fantastic. I was talking to them one day, and usually when I'm at their store, I say, okay, what do I need to be reading in the indie press world? And they will point something out. They will hand sell a book, which I think is, to your point, that is the best way to sell books, is to hand sell books. And so for example, one day they said, "Oh, well, have you read Christopher Sweet? Who's a New Brunswick author?" And they gave me one of his books, and I read it, and I thought, this actually is emblematic emblematic of what I aspire to achieve and want to see in more of the indie publishing community, which is an excellent story, well told, and expertly written and edited. Because you don't really see enough of that. So when I saw that, I I championed that, in my various social media platforms, and I wrote a review on Substack and made sure that I got a review up in Goodreads and Amazon. And he, of course, noticed that, because all of us were like, "Hey, I wonder if anybody's reviewed my book today." You know,
Who's out there?
yeah, and usually they don't. And then I saw him at a book fair and became acquainted with him. And I have one of his other books, uh, The Orchard Room, sitting right to my left, which I need to read shortly, and I expect it will be of the same caliber.
I love that you brought that up because one of the things that I wanted to ask you about was, how important collaboration and a sense of community rather than competition is in the indie world, especially, here on the East Coast, the Atlantic coast of Canada. We're not a huge population. We're really a small family when it comes down to it. And I'm wondering, what you see as the maybe the pros and cons or the role that that needs to play in having a thriving indie publishing community here on the East Coast.
Yeah, it's a great question, and I see many examples of uh, people in indie publishing working together and helping one another. The book fairs that happen. You've probably been to the Greater Moncton Riverview Dieppe book fair, um, by which is put together by Alan Hudson, a local writer. And so he's a perfect example of someone who's trying to help other writers, and he's got his website and he features other writers on there. Um, which I'm thinking of that. Making a mental note. I need to do more of that on my own platforms. I mentioned the Partridge Island um, folks in their bookstore. So, and recently I was approached by the owners and manager of the an indie bookstore in Oromocto. Um, the name eludes me. Some, what is it? The
Dog-eared?
dog-eared
Yes.
books. That's it. Dog-eared books.
Yes. I saw a picture. I was looking at a picture of it last night, actually. They've got fantastic shelves of so many local authors.
Yeah. So you see plenty of examples like that, and that's great. But then, alternatively, because and I hate to bring this up, but I think it has to be brought up. Like I used to think that, oh, okay, so indie publishers and indie writers and indie bookstores, they should all be natural allies. But they're not. Uh, Not to the extent that I think that they could be or ought to be. I've approached several indie bookstores, um, and they don't really want to have anything to do with you. And that's because, in part, I think they're watching their bottom line, and they can't be inundated with indie writers and even indie publishers, and stocking their shelves with books that aren't going to sell. So, I completely get that. Um, but I think that there could be a little bit more friendliness, and I think there's a way that they could make those alliances work. So that's something that I would like to see. And if you look in the indie music scene, now I remember back when we talked about both of us working for the CBC before we get into this line of work. And one of the shows that I used to work for was Q. And we used to have indie musicians on that show all the time. And um, and and having these indie musicians, we didn't frown on those musicians. We didn't, think less of them. We thought that they were great, and we did whatever we could to give them a platform. And then there there's major prizes, awards in the indie music scene, like the Polaris Prize. Um, so to me, that's an example where, I think there was a time when the indie music scene was kind of like the indie publishing scene, and it didn't have the respectability. If you weren't with a major label, then you weren't taken seriously. I don't think that's the case anymore. I think that's, you know, um, the indie music scene is highly respected, and I think that's where we need to get with the indie publishing scene. We need to band together and and maybe have some kind of a big awards thing and then we need to make sure that that isn't just an award or for the cool kids, that it's for everybody. um but I think there's an appetite for that. There's a publisher in Newfoundland, in St. John's. Whenever I go to St. John's, um I pop in, and he's selling his books. um his name is Matthew. I forget his last name, but Engen Books. And he's out there, hawking his wares and making a go of it. And he talked to the last time I talked to him about, we should have our own, distribution network, and, be selling one another's books. And that's the kind of thinking that needs to happen.
Well, and it does have that feel like it's on the horizon now. It's shifting, it's moving, and perhaps that's where we are going to end up with this new strain of publishing. For people who are listening, who are saying, okay, well, yeah, maybe it is time for me to think about going to an indie publisher or self-publishing. What messages do you really want them to take away? What lessons do you want to leave them with?
Well, there's a couple of things. First of all, the one that we touched upon is, money flows to the author in writing. That's like a golden cardinal rule that I think we forget too often. And there are publishing outfits out there that are only too happy to take your money and turn you into a published writer. And maybe you might be able to make your money back or make a profit, but you need to be super careful, because in indie publishing, many books will only sell 50, 100, copies. That will depend on how much how much work you actually put into, the selling and marketing of it. Because if you go with a small publisher, they will want to help you and help you as much as you can, but often there are only one or two or three people and can only help you so far in that regard. So, so if you're laying out, like one or two or $3,000 or whatever to some company to publish your book, you may not make your money back. And then there's also all the other scam artists out there. I get emails every single day from somebody in India, just to pick on one country, uh, but I could pick on many other countries, um, of people who say they can sell my book, and they're so proud that I managed to write Anne of Green Gables. And, I'm like, okay, well, you haven't really done your research about my backlist. But so there's that. Um, then I guess beyond that, um, quality, and I touched upon that as well, and I think it's critical. And it's funny, on Substack, there was somebody from Britain was talking about indie publishing, and I commented. I said, the only thing about indie publishing, what they were getting at was that we need to read one another's books in indie publishing. And that's true. Like, we can't just be, this, for one thing, there's so much other good stuff out there that, we can't just be reading Stephen King and J.K. Rowling. We need to be reading all the other books that are out there, especially the ones from indie publishing. I made the point that I'm not just going to read somebody's book because it's indie publishing. It needs to it needs to be as good as it can possibly be. It needs to be a good read, well presented, and it needs to compete with everyone else out there. You know, the five big publishers. And so at Donovan Street Press, that's what I aspire to do. I tried to make the books. Like I've said to people, they're like, should I buy this book? And I'm like, I'll tell you what, buy the book. If you find a single typo in this book, I'll give you your money back. And I like, it's unbelievably difficult to keep typos out of books, but I'm fanatical about it. And it's one of the things that, because you're always looking to differentiate your product, right? And one of the differentiations for Donovan Street Press for me is that if I publish a book and then we discover a mistake in the book, whether it's in the book or the back copy or whatever, and we've done both, we will correct it and we'll re-upload those files, which is one of the advantages of print on demand publishing, that you can do that. Obviously we can't correct the books that are already out there, but the idea is to make the quality as high as possible. So whether you're publishing yourself or publishing through a small press, the onus is on you to, first of all, learn how to write an engaging book, which is harder than it sounds, and then make it mistake free, like learn grammar, and don't just rely on an editor. That's just going to make the editor's job more difficult if you don't actually know how to put a sentence together or punctuate, you know? And you want to be in a position that you don't want to have to trust the editor because, and this will be a harsh truth, is that there are publishers and editors out there who cannot make your book mistake free because they don't know how, you know. Sorry to say.
No, I
Um,
think that it's true. It's the same in any industry, right? If you're looking for a plumber, some of them are going to be able to do the job. Some of them are going to tell you they can do the job. But if you can find the reviews, you'll know which one can actually do it.
yes, exactly. Yeah. And if you make yourself as self-sufficient and educated as possible, you know, then yeah, you're going to be able to come up with a quality product that people want to read. You won't be wasting a stranger's time, as it's put. That's what you want to do. You want to come up with something. This will not waste your time.
It's a very nice way to put that. I like that idea. For people who are listening now and they're like, oh, yeah, no, I think I trust Joe. I should pitch Donovan Street Press. What do you want to leave those people with in their minds?
We're we're not actually open for submissions. Um, I get submissions all the time. Even though I say on the website I'm not open for submissions because right now it's kind of word of mouth, It's like or I'll stumble across some book that, oh, this needs to be out in the world, But I would like to be open for submissions, but it's mainly me and a business manager friend, um, and then a handful of others. Like we're kind of working together on a quid pro quo basis. So I've got like a friend, Ira Naiman, editing a book at the moment, and then I will edit his book in return. So it's a capacity issue. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to sell enough books, make enough money, so that we can actually hire other editors and then increase our capacity. That's kind of the 5-year plan at the moment. And then maybe, at the end of 5 years, we'll have the capacity to, be able to have a submission window open for 6 hours on the middle of July, one year. And then if you get your manuscript in that little submission window, you know.
I think that kind of perfectly encapsulates the capacity most publishers have at this point in time. If you're lucky, there's one tiny window and you better be paying attention close to find it.
Yeah, yeah. The other thing is that people say to me all the time, "Oh, you got to go to, you got to get arts funding. You got to get provincial funding, from or federal funding." And there's a few things about that. One, I haven't really had the time to pursue it. Like when I finish this conversation, I'm immediately turning to editing a manuscript, and then I'll be, interrupted to do some chores that my wife wants me to do, and then I'll get back to editing that manuscript. And I always have in the back of my mind, oh yeah, I've got to look into arts funding. The little that I have looked into it, I'm like, oh, well, they have this criteria I can't really meet, or I'm not really interested in meeting that criteria. And so I have cheekily in the bottom of my website, I have, Donovan Street Press is financially supported by the people who buy our books. Every other publisher has, supported by the Arts Council of Canada or whatever. Not us. Right now, we're supported by the Bank of Joe Mahoney and the people who buy our books. So
I love that. And I think that does kind of really shine through in your writing and what you have out there about your press and this idea. It really struck me. You described the idea of getting into running an indie press, like playing a board game, and it's more about the playing and the people along the way and what you're learning than whether or not you're actually going to win the game.
completely. Yeah, that's exactly how I look at it. Yeah, it's a running a small press is like playing a board game. And yeah. And it's not about, even when you're playing a board game, for me, it's never about winning, really. It's about enjoying the game and being with the other people. And
Yeah. Well, I've really enjoyed learning more about Donovan Street Press and how you got into it, and the information that you're putting out there and sharing with the world. I find very refreshing and enlightening for people who are wondering about what it's like in the business. So thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us, Joe.
I appreciate your interest and thank you very much for having me.
Joe Mahoney runs Donovan Street Press, an indie publisher based in Riverview, New Brunswick.
WordCraft is a project by the nonprofit Writers Federation of New Brunswick. The show is hosted and produced by Jenna Morton, with technical production by Tosh Taylor. We acknowledge the support of the Canadian Council for the Arts. The Writers Federation of New Brunswick acknowledges that the land on which we live, work, and gather is the traditional unceded territory of the Wolastoqiyik and Mi'kmaq Peoples. We honor the spirit of our ancestors' treaties of peace and friendship.